Hello and welcome to Exposed News Outlet. My name is Andrea and I will be your host. The rise of Christian nationalism in America and the effects that it has on society. But before I get into the facts, if I could ask for you to please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Check the notification bell to be sure you get all my notifications for all my latest content. It really helps me out a lot. And it gets my videos out to the masses and the algorithms that otherwise might not see them. So thank you. It means a lot. And thank you for supporting my independent news channel. Also, I did want to let you know, for those of you who are able to help support independent, truth-driven journalism, empower a transgender voice in the fight for democracy and civil rights. In today's world where misinformation spreads like wildfire and hate-fueled narratives dominate the headlines, independent voices that fight for truth are more important than ever. I am a transgender journalist on a mission to provide quality, fact-based news that challenges the status quo and brings clarity to the stories that matter. As a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I understand firsthand the need for honest, inclusive, and empowering journalism that defends our civil rights, equality, and freedom. But to make this vision a reality, I need your help. As an independent journalist, I'm building a media platform that cuts through the noise and provides real, unbiased coverage, especially on issues that affect marginalized communities, including transgender people. The equipment and software needed to produce high-quality content, ensure professional editing, and run a credible platform are costly. And every day I work toward making this a sustainable reality. Your donation will help me secure the essential tools required to invest in professional equipment and software to produce clear, engaging, and impactful videos and articles, counter the rising tide of disinformation and anti-transgender propaganda with facts, truth, and personal stories that empower those that most affected, keep independent journalism alive by ensuring that voices like mine and others from marginalized communities are heard, respected, and have the resources to make a real impact. This is not just about supporting my platform. This is about standing up for the values that shape a healthy democracy: truth, transparency, civil rights, and equality. In a world where mainstream media is often compromised or corrupted, independent journalists have a crucial role in making sure that the facts reach the people who need them most. Together, we can build a future where every voice is heard, where misinformation doesn't have the final say, and where civil rights, especially for transgender people and those marginalized, are not just protected but celebrated. Please donate today and help me continue to fight for truth, freedom, and democracy. Your support is more than just a financial contribution. It's a commitment to a more informed, more inclusive world. Thank you for believing in the power of independent journalism. In the description box below, for those whom are in the position to help build this platform and community. And thanks again. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. The rise of Christian nationalism represents a dangerous fusion of political ideology and religious belief that distorts the core teachings of the Christianity in order to advance a deeply divisive and exclusionary agenda. Traditional Christianity promotes values of love, compassion, equality, and justice. Christian nationalism often distorts these teachings to serve the goals of white nationalism and authoritarianism. This misuse of religion is a form of manipulation that combines the power of religion with the tactics of identity politics and xenophobia for control, turning Christianity into a tool of division and oppression. Let me play this clip.
The phrase white Christian nationalism has been in the headlines quite a bit recently, but what does it really mean? Laura Barón Lopez recently spoke to one expert to better understand the concept and its reach in American society.
Brad Onishi is a former evangelical minister who once identified as a Christian nationalist himself. He left the church in 2005 and began studying religion from the outside, including extremism. He now hosts the popular podcast Straight White American Jesus and is the author of Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. I began by asking him what that term actually means.
Christian nationalism is an ideology that is based around the idea that this is a Christian nation, that this was founded as a Christian nation, and therefore it should be a Christian nation today and should be so in the future. According to survey data, Christian nationalists agree with statements like the federal government should declare the United States of America a Christian nation. Our laws should be based on Christian values. Being a Christian is important if you want to be a real American.
Onishi tracks a number of subgroups and ideas under the umbrella of white Christian nationalism, including what's known as the New Apostolic Reformation.
Well, the New Apostolic Reformation is notable for a number of reasons. One, it's built around the idea that Christians are called to a new transformation or reformation of the United States. These are Christians who want to revolutionize the way that our country looks and to make it great again in terms of being a Christian nation. They also are deeply invested in the notion of spiritual warfare, the idea that we are called as Christians to fight a cosmic battle between good and evil, and that it's our duty to be boots on the ground for God in that conflict. What this has led to some decades later is the New Apostolic Reformation leaders, the apostles and the prophets that are really at the head of this movement, were some of the earliest to support Donald Trump in 2016, and they've remained steadfast in that support. They were at the very avant-garde of trying to get the 2020 election overturned in the wake of Joe Biden's victory and mobilizing folks to be at January 6th. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of New Apostolic Reformation Christians at January 6th, as an example.
We know that 2/3 of white evangelicals sympathize or adhere to white Christian nationalist beliefs. So where do they fall within this larger movement?
I think white evangelicals are the group we think of when we think of white Christian nationalism, and for good reason. These are folks who, when we think about the Iowa caucuses, in 2016, Trump's white evangelical voters were about 20% of his share of voters in that cycle. Just a few weeks ago in 2024, that grew to well over 50%. White evangelicals remain committed to the MAGA movement, and one of the key indicators of why is Christian nationalism.
Are there leaders across these subgroups of white Christian nationalism that are tied to the former president directly or to his larger network?
Yes. For example, a group of New Apostolic Reformation leaders, apostles and prophets and others, were present at the White House a week before January 6th. Speaker Mike Johnson has direct ties to the New Apostolic Reformation. Speaker Mike Johnson is somebody who's sought the counsel and the friendship of Timothy Carcaden, who is a New Apostolic Reformation pastor from his home district in Shreveport, Louisiana. Timothy Carcaden is a close associate with Dutch Sheets. Dutch Sheets is perhaps the most ardent Trump supporter in the New Apostolic Reformation. He's the one who may have done the most of any Christian leader in the United States to mobilize folks to try to overturn the 2020 election and to make sure to attend January 6th. One of the most frightening things, I think, about Mike Johnson is the flag he hangs outside of his office, an Appeal to Heaven flag. The Appeal to Heaven flag goes back to the Revolutionary War, George Washington. It was inspired by John Locke. But over the last 10 years, the Appeal to Heaven flag has been popularized by Dutch Sheets. Dutch Sheets sees the Appeal to Heaven flag as a symbol of Christian revolution. If you look closely at January 6th, you will see dozens of Appeal to Heaven flags. It may have a long history, but in the contemporary context, it has a very specific meaning. So the fact that Mike Johnson has it hanging outside of his office, to me signifies how he understands his role as Speaker of the House in terms of being a Christian and being an American.
In a statement to the NewsHour, a spokesperson for Johnson's office said, quote, The speaker has long appreciated the rich history of the flag. Any implication that the speaker's use of the flag is connected to the events of January 6th is wildly inaccurate. But Onishi says the concerning links go beyond the conservative politicians themselves. Last month, Lance Wallnau, a key New Apostolic Reformation figure, announced he was partnering with Charlie Kirk, the influential right-wing activist who leads Turning Point USA.
They're going to be visiting and focusing on swing states, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania. They claim they've already signed up 2,500 churches, and they want to mobilize those churches directly for political involvement and specifically to get Trump reelected. The two of them together signifies a crossover. It signifies a joining in a way that promises, I think, to be quite potent.
Meanwhile, some have mobilized around what GOP leaders have labeled an invasion at the southern border. I asked Onishi about a protest convoy calling itself God's Army, currently making its way to Texas.
I think the end goal for the convoy is to kind of play a part or play a role in what they take to be the story that is unfolding in the United States. Christian nationalists understand themselves to be playing a character. They are drawn into a narrative that says, you are at the last battle. You have a chance to do something that is much bigger than you. Will you answer that call? Will you come to D.C. on January 6th? Will you ride with us to the southern border? Because these are the moments, these are the battles that will shape our country. This is the cosmic war between good and evil. Are you really going to sit on the sidelines? Some of us can laugh that off. We can think that that's a fringe ideal, but January 6th was not something to laugh off. And some of the events we've seen since then, the swatting of judges' houses, the evacuations of capitals due to bomb threats, so many more examples, little fires everywhere, are not things we can laugh off. And so I think the trucker convoy has cosmic goals as it plays a part in a very earthly standoff between Governor Abbott and the Biden administration.
Brad Onishi, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
That one day, this nation will rightfully rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. So let freedom reign. When we let it reign from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
For more than 3 centuries, many different children of God have been coming to America, hoping to find it, or to make it, a land of freedom. Freedom to us nowadays, as to Martin Luther King, means above all political and economic freedom. But for the refugees who came in the early days to America, it meant religious freedom. Freedom to worship God as their consciences dictated. Freedom merely for their own religious views and ways to be tolerated. These are Mennonites living in Pennsylvania, descendants of radical Christians in 16th century Europe who were known as Anabaptists. Most of the Mennonites in Pennsylvania live ordinary modern American lives, but this particular group has become famous for clinging to the ways and clothes of the past. They're the old order Amish. They still speak a European language, a form of German, and they reject all the easy comforts of modern life, such as the motor car. A certain obstinate integrity causes these people to look old-fashioned. But the same quality of independence made their ancestors seem dangerous radicals. If their Anabaptist forefathers had flaunted their religion like this, they'd have been executed. Anabaptists have been chased from country to country for centuries. But this town of Mikulov in southern Czechoslovakia was their very earliest place of refuge. For 2 exciting years, from 1526, Anabaptists came from far and wide to seek shelter beneath this castle, invited here by the man who lived in it, Leonard von Liechtenstein. The movement had begun only 12 months before in Zurich, when a group studying the Bible decided to baptize each other. The conventional baptism of a dribbling baby, they maintained, was meaningless. Entry into Christ's church should be a solemn decision by a responsible adult. But this degree of self-reliance terrified the existing churches, Protestant as well as Catholic. And Protestant Zurich reacted sharply. Anabaptists were to be drowned, the town council decreed with macabre irony. If they want baptism, let them have it in good measure. A larger proportion of Anabaptists were martyred than any other single group, including even the early Christians on whom they modeled themselves. And all for what, to us, seems a very modest demand, a man's right to his own beliefs. Their voice was one which had not been heard for many years. It was the voice of ordinary men and women, prepared to stand up against all authority for conscience's sake. It's heard at its most moving in a letter which a young Anabaptist woman wrote from Antwerp jail to her daughter of only a few days old. The woman's husband had already been burnt as an Anabaptist, and she herself had been reprieved only just long enough to give birth to her child. Now, she was about to die, and she writes to tell her child not to grow up ashamed that her parents were burnt as heretics.
My dearest child, the true love of God strengthen you in virtue, you whom I must leave in this wicked, evil, perverse world. Oh, that it had pleased the Lord that I might have brought you up, but it seems that it is not the Lord's will. Even so, it has now gone with your father and myself. We were so well joined that we would not have forsaken each other for the whole world, and yet we had to leave each other for the Lord's sake. We were permitted to live together only half a year. Be not ashamed of us. Your dear father demonstrated with his blood that it is the genuine truth, and I also hope to attest the same with my blood. Hence, my dear Janikin, do not accustom your mouth to filthy talk, nor to ugly lies, and run not in the street as other bad children do. Rather take up a book and learn to seek there that which concerns your salvation. And now, Janikin, my dear lamb, who are yet very little and young, I leave you this letter. Read it when you have understanding, and keep it as long as you live in remembrance of me and of your father. Be not ashamed to confess our faith, since it is the true evangelical faith, another than which shall never be found.
Beneath the castle at Mikulov, there was soon a thriving colony of Anabaptists. They were welcome here, not only because the lord of the castle shared their faith, but also because they helped in his vineyards. But one colony rapidly turned into two. As the Catholics have always known, nothing leads to disagreement quite so quickly as reading the Bible. The argument centered on pacifism. One group found in the Gospels the message that one could use force to defend oneself. The others saw only complete pacifism in the Gospels and even communism, the need to share all worldly goods like the early Christians. There are today Protestant sects which descend from both these viewpoints, but Even in Mikulov, persecution from outside soon put an end to the argument. The leader of one group was burnt and his wife was thrown into the Danube with a stone around her neck. And the eventual leader of the communists, Jakob Hutter, was whipped, brandy was poured into his wounds, and he was set alight. In spite of persecution, the Anabaptists persisted, moved into new areas, and survived, until they finally found shelter in America. But there were other Protestant minorities, such as the Huguenots in France, of whom the Anabaptists would have profoundly disapproved. This castle at Amboise belonged to the French royal family, who were Catholic, and it was the scene of one of the violent incidents in the Protestant bid for power. Many nobles had become Protestants. They felt themselves strong enough to demand tolerance, or even to seize it, and perhaps with it, the throne. Here at Amboise, the Huguenots hatched a plot which would have horrified the Anabaptists. They, after all, had only asked for freedom from the state. The Huguenots were very different. They tried to take over the state, and they fought for it with an unscrupulous ferocity which was rivaled only by that of their Catholic opponents. A group of Huguenots tried to kidnap the young King of France when he was in this royal castle at Amboise. The plot failed. The conspirators were taken into the castle, were tortured, and then were dragged out onto this balcony, where ropes were tied around their necks and they were flung over. Their hanging bodies were intended to impress the crowd outside. But it was said that the royal family, dining below, took especial pleasure in seeing their enemies dangling against the evening sky. On St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572, they had an even more brutal revenge. Flinging Huguenots from balconies was becoming a habit. This massacre of Protestants took place in Paris. It had been ordered by the royal family, and it lasted 2 whole days. Huguenots were dragged from their beds into the street. Thousands died. In the struggle of the Huguenots for power, politics and religion were inseparably mixed. And for a while, the religious problem was solved with the easy cynicism of politics. In 1589, the heir to the French throne was a Protestant prince, Henry IV. But Paris would only accept a Catholic king. And so, with one of history's best-known throwaway lines, Paris vaut bien une messe, Paris is well worth a mass, Henry went to mass, became a Catholic, and became King of France. As king, he was able to pass the Edict of Nantes, which guaranteed that even though the vast majority of Frenchmen were Catholics, no Protestant would be persecuted for his faith. But such personal protection from the king could only last as long as the king himself. When Henry died, persecution of the Huguenots soon returned. By the end of the 17th century, nearly 500,000 of them had fled from France, and Louis XIV had repealed the Edict of Nantes. Louis was soon even boasting that he had eliminated all trace of Protestant worship from his kingdom. But he was wrong. In the hills of the Cévennes, in the south of France, ordinary Huguenots, peasants and shepherds, persisted against all odds in their Calvinist faith. They fought a desperate guerrilla war against the king's troops. In one terrible autumn, nearly 500 of their villages were burnt, but the people resisted every persecution. After thousands of Huguenots had fled overseas, in particular to America, the king was determined to convert by force those who remained in France.
So it would appear we are being massacred for praying to God, as if that were an evil thing, to serve God according to the purity of his Gospels. His Majesty will allow us to say that if we are not granted our request to leave the kingdom or to assemble freely in the desert, then we will suffer any outrage that it should please His Majesty to attempt on us, rather than give up our faith.
The Huguenots called this part of France the desert, because here they would resist to the end, just as Jesus, in the desert, had resisted the devil. Nothing would terrorize these peasants back into the Catholic fold. Today, many villages in this area have no Catholic church. But in the days of persecution, the Huguenots had to practice a hidden faith. Their houses had secret places where a minister could hide when the king's dragoons came. The cellars of the houses were linked, so the man might emerge to safety as much as half a mile away. The cup for the communion wine would be formed of separate pieces, to be screwed together for a service in the open air. This is designed to look like a large grain barrel, but add the other parts which it contains and it becomes a handsome pulpit, something to give dignity and weight to a sermon preached in the woods. Many early accounts tell of the rare excitement, the sense of special occasion at those forbidden gatherings.
My aunt and uncle never missed the secret services which were held near our village, and I had pleaded for some time to be allowed to accompany them. I so fervently wished to see a minister. This they permitted. We left between 9 and 10 of the evening in winter, and we walked across the heather. Occasionally we did espy the lookouts who would point the way for us. After much walking, we arrived at the foot of a mountain. There, amidst the trees, there was a small opening. We entered and came upon a wooded clearing where, to my surprise, there were already gathered a goodly number of people.
Seigneur, lui dit la femme, tu n'as rien pour puiser.
In the Cévennes, Huguenots still celebrate from time to time an open-air service, in memory of those dangerous days when their ancestors held true to their Calvinist faith.
Here's how this phenomenon plays out. The fusion of white nationalism and Christianity. Christian nationalism in its current form is often tied to white nationalist ideologies, which promote the belief that the United States or other countries should be a Christian nation, with a particular emphasis on a racially exclusive vision of national identity. While Christianity at its core advocates for love and compassion for all people, Christian nationalists selectively emphasize certain parts of the Bible to support ideas of cultural superiority and racial segregation. This twisted version of Christianity is used to justify policies that exclude non-white people, immigrants, LGBTQ plus individuals, and religious minorities from society. The narrative they build is one of preserving a country's identity, usually based on a nostalgic, idolized past, where white Christian values were central, ignoring the reality of America's diverse and pluralistic history. Even attacks on abortion and the so-called pro-life movement, where Trump and these MAGA cultists try to claim, which it fools many of these supporters. However, the white nationalists know exactly what the real meaning is, and it's about the birth dearth. They wrote a book in 1987 called The Birth Dearth, where they explain that whites will be minority if they don't do something about it or to stop it. And they determined if they stopped the white women from having abortions, because at this point it was, I believe, 60% of the population was white that was having abortions, that they could slow white people from becoming minority. Here is Jane Elliott, a longtime civil rights advocate, explaining a little bit about this.
The reason our fearless leader, our cheater, and the reason he is closing Planned Parenthood, sorry about that, the reason he is closing Planned Parenthood, what's the word I want? Planned Parenthood offices, is because too many white women are abortions, and he thinks that's what Planned Parenthood gives us. That isn't what Planned Parenthood is for. It's to help women with the many, many problems that they have. But he thinks all they're for is abortion and white people. When in 1987, when the book The Birth Dearth was written, and that's the word, that plus the writings of Adolf Hitler are what this man is basing his governmental policies on. In 1987, 60% of the fetuses that were aborted every year were white. Then we started closing Planned Parenthood clinics. In 2018, only 39% of the aborted fetuses were white. Are we succeeding in increasing the number of white births? Yes, we are. It's a cute trick, and it's what he wants to do. increase the number of white babies being born in this country. The whole thing is so ludicrous and based on a lie. We should have gotten over it a long time ago. But it's hard to get over if, when you go to church and pray about it, and you hear the preacher standing in front of a white male on the cross. Now, the Bible says that Jesus had kinky woolly hair, animal-like hair, and feet of bronze. And now we know that he was an Ethiopian Jew. Well, if you're from Ethiopia, the chances are pretty good that you ain't pink.
Is it fear, envy, or ignorance that fuels this fire that they just refuse to let go of?
It is ignorance, and people like Donosaurus T. Rump, or whatever you want to call him, keep encouraging and inciting fear in people so that they will fear people of color. He wants to build a wall on the southern border of the United States so he can keep those brown-skinned people out. Because he has said several times, we've got to keep out here because brown-skinned people reproduce too freely. Too many brown-skinned people is going to really kill the number of the people who have power in this country. This is all about racism. Make no mistake about that. If we can keep you afraid of, for instance, that ignorant white female with her dog called the cops to come and stop the black man in the park who was a bird watcher who asked her to leash her dog. And she called the police and told them, I think he's going to attack me. He's attacking me. Please send someone up. They sent a patrol car out to put a stop to a black man who was asking a pale-faced woman to leash her dog. Now the signs on the park said, leash your dog. But she's a female. She doesn't have to obey the rules. We're looking at the difference between liberty and justice for all. We're looking at the land of the free she was and the home of the brave where the black man was. And when I hear that song, you know, the national anthem, I think the land of the free, that's all those white folks in the stands at a football game. And the home of the brave, that's those black males on the field who are willing to get their brains beat out in order to make enough money to keep them in their old age. That's the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That is another interesting perspective. Now, do you think the experiences that you have replicated over the years, do you think that they were like received well, or the point went across so good because did it resonate more because it was told through the eyes of children?
It didn't resonate well each time I did it. I have been called every name you could possibly call. My mother kicked me out of the family after my father died. I lost all my friends. My kids lost all their friends. My kids were beaten and spit on and abused, verbally, physically, and physically, because they had what to this day is called an N-word lover for a mother. That did not resonate well. The majority of the United States who agreed with what I did were smart enough to maintain a low profile, keep your head down. And that's what a number of teachers in that system did. They get along. But then several years after I did that exercise, one of the parents of the kids, of a child in that class, stopped me on the street in Osage and said, we've been wanting to talk to you for years. We are sorry that we didn't stand up and defend you against the kinds of things that were being said about you. But I said, wait a minute, you don't have to apologize for that. You had to live in that community and you had to get along with those folks. I could move out every day. I could drive over to Osage and live in Osage, and I didn't have to get along with those people except with the teachers when I was in the classroom. I didn't get along with them. I found out how Typhoid Mary must have felt. I could walk down the hall and nobody would speak to me. It got to be so comical. I could ruin their day just by walking into their classroom because they were afraid somebody would see me in there and they'd think that teacher in whose room I was was thinking like Jane Elliott, so they couldn't have that happen. It was just a scream. My father said one night after I complained about what was happening, he said, Jane, just keep smiling. They'll wonder what the hell you're up to. So I'd smile and I'd laugh and I'd chuckle all the way down the hall. And they had to be wondering, why isn't she bothered? I was hating her. What's the matter with this woman? Must be crazy. Well, we knew she was crazy. Look what she did with those poor little children. And laugh and walk away. Because my kids learned something that their teachers didn't know.
So number 2 is using religion for political manipulation and control. Christian nationalism is not just about religion. It is strategic and manipulative. Political leaders and activists who promote Christian nationalism often exploit the deep emotional connection that many people have with their faith to further their political goals. By associating the Christian identity with their political platform, they create a narrative where anyone who opposes them is attacking Christianity itself. This builds a sense of moral superiority and righteousness around their political positions, making it more difficult for others to challenge them without appearing to be anti-Christian. This manipulation becomes particularly potent because it combines religious fervor with a sense of patriotism, making opposition to their views seem un-American or even sacrilegious. 3 is distorting Christian values to serve an authoritarian agenda. Christian values, as taught in the New Testament, focus on love, kindness, humility, justice, and caring for the marginalized. However, Christian nationalism distorts these values to promote exclusion, oppression, and the dominance of specific racial or cultural groups. For instance, Jesus' teachings on loving one's neighbor and showing compassion for the poor and the oppressed are selectively ignored or twisted to support policies that harm immigrants, refugees, the poor, and racial minorities. This leads to the promotion of policies such as anti-immigration laws, voter suppression, and anti-LGBTQ+ laws, which run directly counter to the principles of love and equality that are central to Christian teachings. In doing so, Christian nationalists hijack religious language and symbolism to serve the agenda that is deeply un-Christian in its nature. Let me play this clip.
Donald Trump is portraying himself as a religious savior. He says Election Day will be
Christian Visibility Day.
Trump has repeatedly compared his criminal trials to the crucifixion of Jesus, promoted videos calling his re-election, quote, the most important moment in human history, and that describe him as a divinely appointed ruler.
A shepherd to mankind who won't ever leave nor forsake them. So God made Trump.
He claims to be a holy warrior against an imaginary attack on Christianity.
They want to tear down crosses, but no one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration. I swear to you.
He's even selling his own version of the Bible.
We must make America pray again.
Trump is playing to a rising white Christian nationalist movement within the Republican Party.
I say it proudly, we should be Christian nationalists.
Christian nationalists believe that the law of the land is not the Constitution, but instead the law of God, as they interpret it. Trump supporters are increasingly overt in their calls to replace democracy with a MAGA theocracy.
The church is supposed to direct the government, and I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk.
We're meant to be a Christian nation. We should be a Christian nation.
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here.
That was a cross he was holding. The idea that the will of voters is irrelevant because God has anointed Trump was a recurring message in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Because it is not Joe Biden that rules this country. Jesus Christ is the king of everything in this world. Christ is king! Christ is king! Christ is king!
In previous videos, I've highlighted how MAGA Republicans have embraced core elements of fascism. The combination of fascism and Christian nationalism is called Christo-fascism, a term first used half a century ago by the theologian Dorothy Zola. Fascists rise to power by characterizing their opponents as subhuman. Christo-fascists take it a step further by casting opponents as not just subhuman, but actually demonic.
People like Nancy Pelosi, she's a demon.
Framing opponents as enemies of God makes violence against them not only seem justifiable, but divinely sanctioned and almost inevitable.
We are going to put on the armor of God. And maybe strap on a Glock on the side of us just in case.
When we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. And these people that are suppressing the name Christ and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power.
Christo-fascists want to strip away a wide range of rights Americans take for granted. Former Trump staffers involved in developing plans for a second Trump term have called for imposing biblical tests on immigration, overturning marriage equality, and restricting contraception. And MAGA-aligned judges are already setting their dogma ahead of the Constitution. In his concurring opinion on the case that declared frozen embryos are people, Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Parker cited God more than 40 times and quoted the book of Genesis and other religious texts. Nothing could be more un-American than the Christian nationalist vision. So many of America's founders came here as refugees seeking religious freedom. The framers of the Constitution were adamant that religion had no role in our government. The words God, Jesus, and Christ don't appear anywhere in the Constitution. And the very first words of the Bill of Rights are a promise that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Christo-fascism, or any religion-based form of government, is a rejection of everything America has aspired to be, a secular, multiracial society whose inhabitants have come from everywhere, bound together by a faith in equal opportunity, democracy, and the rule of law. Beware.
Number 4 is mind control and manipulation of the faithful. Christian nationalism can function as a form of mind control by leveraging the psychological power of religion and manipulate followers. By aligning political agendas with God's will, Christian nationalists create a sense of moral duty among their followers, convincing them that supporting certain policies is not just a political choice, but a religious obligation. This creates an us versus them mentality, where followers feel they are part of a righteous, chosen group, fighting against perceived enemies of God, whether those enemies are immigrants, people of color, progressives, or secularists. This manipulation capitalizes on people's desire for meaning and belonging and spiritual certainty, while masking the fact that these religious ideals are being used to further an agenda that benefits the rich and powerful and marginalizes the vulnerable. Number 5, the danger of Christian nationalism for society. The rise of Christian nationalism is not just a political threat, it is also a moral and ethical crisis. By intertwining political ideologies with religious identity, it risks creating a society in which people's political choices are determined not by reason or empathy, but by religious fervor and tribal loyalty. This leads to a polarized society where dissenting voices, including those within the Christian community who challenge the misuse of their faith, are demonized. It also undermines genuine religious freedom as it conflates a particular political agenda with the will of God, which is deeply problematic in pluralistic societies where people of many faiths and no faith must coexist. 6 is the long-term risks to democracy and human rights. Christian nationalism, particularly when it merges with white nationalism, which is most common, poses a direct threat to democracy. As we have seen in history, when religious movements become political movements, they can justify authoritarian rule. Christian nationalists often attack secularism and democratic institutions, arguing that religious values should override laws and courts. This can lead to the eroding of civil rights, weakening democratic institutions, and increasing the concentration of power in the hands of a few. Often it's the wealthy elites, much like we see playing out today. Additionally, the promotion of policies based on exclusionary nationalism creates an atmosphere of fear, division, and hate, which undermines the social cohesion needed for a peaceful and prosperous society. Number 7 is historical parallels and warnings. The rise of Christian nationalism, especially when intertwined with white nationalism, has historical precedents that serve as a warning. One prominent example is Nazi Germany, where religion and nationalism were manipulated by the regime to justify policies of exclusion, oppression, and genocide. Though Nazi propaganda used Christianity to rally support for their racist agenda, it did so in a way that twisted Christianity teachings to serve the state's totalitarian objectives. Similarly, modern Christian nationalism draws on symbols, rhetoric, and myths about a Christian nation that needs to be preserved, often using fear and resentment of outsiders or social change to justify exclusionary policies. And in conclusion, Christian nationalism, when fused with white nationalism, is dangerous and manipulative ideology that distorts the core values of Christianity to serve an exclusionary authoritarian agenda. It exploits religious faith as a tool for political power and social control, leading to an undermining of genuine Christian values like love, equality, and compassion. It creates a moral framework that justifies the oppression, particularly of minorities, immigrants, and marginalized groups, while reinforcing the power of elites. This movement threatens not only religious freedom, but the very foundations of democracy and human rights, and its rise is a serious risk to the unity and justice of society as a whole. It is also important to remember that the Founding Fathers decided that separation of church and state was imperative to keeping a healthy democracy, as oftentimes in the past, religion can be used to manipulate thoughts or control. Much of the reason many of the immigrants left Europe originally was to get away from the corrupt kingdoms and religions and cults. Let me play this clip.
Violent riot at the Capitol building last week. Our Nick Emmons spoke with Dr. Stephen Hassan, a former member of the Moonies cult in the 1970s, who's written a book that compares his experiences to what he sees in the president and some of his supporters who were willing to become violent on the president's behalf.
You don't seem to be a political person who goes around talking about politics all the time, right? You are specifically, dealing with people who were handling mind control, getting out of cults and things like that. So why did you write the book, The Cult of Trump?
Yeah, I've been specifically not political, human rights guy. My agent suggested the book and the title, and my first reaction is it's going to alienate all the people who are believers, so I don't want to do it. And they said, yeah, but they're not going to read your book anyway, and the public needs to understand what cults are, and they need to understand the stereotypical profile of a cult leader, which, by the way, is malignant narcissism, and I have a whole chapter comparing Trump with Jim Jones and Moon and Hubbard and other cult leaders. So that's why I decided to go out of my comfort zone, because I felt that strongly that democracy was at great risk and that this was an opportunity to share my life work and try to wake people up to the fact that intelligent, educated people can be deceived and can be manipulated and can be indoctrinated into a destructive authoritarian cult.
You talked a little bit about the personality trait of a cult leader, malignant narcissist. Walk me through what you see in President Trump, both before he was, into politics and running for president, and then as he was president. Talk about his personality that stands out to you.
Sure. So the term malignant narcissist is not just the narcissism, but the sociopathic, elements as well. And so the grandiosity, the need for admiration and praise, the lack of empathy, and then moving on to pathological lying, believing they're above the law, threats, paranoia, inability to trust. You go down the entire list, as I did in chapter 3, and compared him with other cult leaders, and they're all there, unfortunately. And I also, in my research for the book, realized that there were a lot of authoritarian cults that were influencing Trump, that were backing his run for president, and whose followers are his base. And the public doesn't understand this portion of it, which is critical for them.
And that brings up another point here, because 74 million people voted for Trump. So what specifically is the cult of Trump? Is it all 74 million people who decided to, check his name at the ballot box, or what is the specific cult that you're referring to?
So for me, I do not think everyone who voted for him is necessarily a mind control victim. I do think that there are people who are single issue voters, like, pro right to life, for fetuses, etc. So they may have voted even.
The claim that the United States was founded as a Christian nation is a misconception, one that often overlooks the true intent and historical context of the country's founding. In reality, the United States was born out of a desire to escape religious persecution, as well as the corruption and authoritarianism that characterized many European monarchies at a time. Here's a breakdown of why the notion of the U.S. as a Christian nation is a myth, and how the country's founding principles were rooted in religious freedom rather than imposition of any one religion. 1. The founders escaped from religious persecution in Europe. Many of the early settlers of what would become the United States were fleeing from the religious oppression and tyrannical control of European monarchies. The claim that the United States was founded as a Christian nation is a misconception. Much of the reason many of the immigrants left Europe originally was to get away from the corrupt kingdoms and religions and cults. Let me play this clip.
On YouTube. But anyway, a few years ago, I noticed a bunch of folks who identify as white started bringing up something called the Great Replacement. Put simply, the Great Replacement theory says that too much immigration of non-white folks to countries that are mostly made up of white folks is bad. Not only that, those who promote the Great Replacement theory argue that welcoming immigration policies for non-whites are part of a plot meant to either weaken or replace the political power and culture of white people living in Western countries. When I say Western countries, it's not just Europe I'm talking about. I'm also talking about the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand. By the way, you might want to check out my video about Western values when you get a chance. Huh? Simply put, the Great Replacement is the alleged replacement of whites by non-whites. It often overlaps with a larger theory called the white genocide conspiracy theory, which revolves around the beliefs that powerful people are trying to prevent whites from having kids. Often the conspiracy is blamed on, you guessed it, Jewish people. This theory is manipulative because it equates normal patterns of immigration with murder. It's trying to put a big equals sign between the new Salvadoran or Syrian who lives down the street and a mental image of a concentration camp. Now, obviously, if they literally did that, then you and I wouldn't fall for the messaging. Therefore, the messengers have to be a little bit more subtle about it. And lately, they've gotten pretty good at manipulating us. Here's the thing though, not only are those who preach about the Great Replacement theory manipulating us, but as it turns out, the entire theory is bullcrap. It's literally not backed by evidence at all. There is no secret plot to get rid of white folks, but let's just say that there was. Well, they must be doing a pretty poor job, eh? Since there are more white folks now than ever before. You might be thinking, well, duh, Mr. Beat, but whites represent a smaller percentage of the proportion of the world. Well, who counts as white isn't based on genetics or even demographics. It's based on politics. In the United States, for example, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, and Polish Americans weren't considered white until the early 1900s. Greek Americans weren't white until just a few decades ago. Some Arab Americans used to be considered white, but by the end of the 1900s were no longer considered white. Even though race isn't a biological reality, it has still been a way for people in power to divide us up over the years. Not only that, immigration is simply currently not high enough, nor will it likely ever be, to make it so that skin color, values, or culture will completely change in one country. Sure, there will be demographic changes, and there already has been, but there is no evidence that these recent demographic changes have dramatically changed the dominant culture and values of any one country. We often just see cultural assimilation. Oh, cultural assimilation is the process in which a minority culture gets absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. Not that that matters, as these immigrants already share American values. That's why they're coming here. And the different cultures they bring are almost always beneficial to American society. Also, most immigrants, and especially their children, assimilate peacefully into the existing culture, which, by the way, is constantly changing anyway, and has always been multicultural. This is no surprise to me, as I've had many students who were the kids of immigrants, but if I didn't know they were the kids of immigrants, I would have assumed that their family had been in this country for many generations. So then it just comes down to skin color, and if you're really concerned that skin colors of all humans in your society might change, have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why? Skin pigmentation is highly correlated with distance from the equator. That's right. The random lottery of how far you are from this line determines what color you get to be. The primary pigment in human skin is melanin, which is used to protect us from the sun. Just because your friend Jessica doesn't get sunburnt as often as you doesn't make her any less human. More than that, this distribution of colors has changed a lot over human history, and Europeans from even just 8,000 years ago looked dramatically different than they do today. Keep in mind that for the vast majority of human history, humans with lighter skin pigmentation have not existed. So who came up with the Great Replacement theory? Well, apparently this dude came up with a modern concept of the Great Replacement theory, René Camus, a French writer who at least popularized the term with a couple books, the first of which came out in 2010. Camus argued that white Europeans were being disproportionately replaced by immigrants from Africa and the Middle East, which could lead to the, quote, extinction of whites. Camus particularly was afraid of Muslim immigration, arguing they often had a much higher birth rate than whites. Even though around 40% of Muslims identify as, you know, white, but I digress. It's not surprising that white supremacists were attracted to Camus' Great Replacement theory, but incredibly it became fairly mainstream by the time I first encountered it in this 2017 video by, oh, what was her name? Warren Northern? Yeah, I think that was it. Well, the video has since been taken down, but still, back in 2017, it did very well, and just Warren casually bringing up the theory like it ain't no thing was surprising. It was proof that Camus had given white supremacists a powerful argument to use, even if that argument was false. Since then, his followers have described immigration as an invasion, and they generally promote the idea that non-white immigrants, whatever that means, have dramatically different values than whites, and are trying to erase white culture. Isn't it just another version of xenophobia? I mean, yeah. Basically. Yeah, before Camus popularized his Great Replacement theory going back more than 100 years before that in France, there was a nationalist, anti-non-white immigrant movement brewing there. In fact, in most of the Western world, going back to the 1800s, there have been similar movements, especially due to the increase of immigrants to the Western world from African and Asian countries. Because of this xenophobia, many people in Western countries called for nativism, or the policy of protecting native-born citizens over immigrants. Xenophobia hasn't always been about skin color. In the United States, for example, many nativists hated the Irish, Catholics, Jewish people. This is what led to groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Oh, goodness gracious. But the Great Replacement theory is different in that it has found widespread appeal online. Media-savvy white supremacists have been successful making it appealing to people who are, definitely not white supremacists. This might be because now they say Great Replacement instead of white genocide. Even a member of Congress, Steve King of Iowa, endorsed the theory. The scariest thing about this being so mainstream is that it has led to violence. A lot of it. In 2011, this guy from Norway wrote a 1,500-page manifesto explaining his fear of white ethnic replacement by migrants from the Middle East and North Africa. He then killed 77 in a terrorist attack. In 2018, this guy from Pennsylvania posted online that Jews were responsible for the Great Replacement and they needed to be killed. He then went on to kill 11 people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Some of those were Holocaust survivors. The next year, this guy from Texas also wrote a manifesto that said he was going to defend his country from a, quote, cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion of Hispanics. He then went on to kill 23 people at a Walmart in El Paso. And then, of course, the Buffalo shooting, which happened while we made this video, also was inspired by the Great Replacement theory. Now, obviously, not everyone who falls for these lies will commit a mass murder. But anyone, including me and you, can fall for Great Replacement theory messaging since they use manipulative tactics to make false claims sound plausible. And if we're not careful and critical, we can be manipulated and heck, we could even be radicalized by this stuff. For the rest of this video, we're going to look at how people fall for the Great Replacement theory and look at how you can avoid falling for it too. Those who tend to promote the Great Replacement theory often use the same talking points. They are all bullcrap, but persist anyway. Talking point number 1. Biology is destiny. It's manipulative because when we hear biology, we think, oh, it's science, so it has to be legit, right? This one says that culture is genetically determined and that genetic features predetermine cultural traits. For example, they might say that all of the problems in the African American community and in all of Africa are rooted in inferior genetics or culture. In other words, they say that black people inherently are less intelligent or more likely to be violent. It's bullcrap. It's been disproven by decades of scholarly research. For example, many outcomes from measures of intelligence to violence are driven by socioeconomic status and income inequality. There is absolutely no evidence that biology is the driving factor. For example, African Americans perform similarly to other Americans when given access to the same opportunities. Talking point number 2. We are brave to speak the truth, and the normies are cowards. It's manipulative because it's fun to be in a secret club and have access to secret information. Basically, this one says that people with racist beliefs are actually countercultural truth tellers. They're not sheep who conform. Yeah, if conforming means not being racist, I think we ought to conform then. And for people who don't conform, they sure use the same talking points a lot. Talking point number 3. Diversity is conflict. It's manipulative because the vast majority of us fear conflict. And this one says that diversity automatically causes conflict. It often relies on cherry-picking evidence and studies to back up its claim. It's bullcrap. There is plenty of research that actually shows that diversity enriches societies, even in the ways the haters claim to care about. For example, diverse groups of problem solvers often outperform groups of high performers on really tough problems. And that makes sense because tough problems need new perspectives. It's how we got automatic elevator doors, basketball, and the iPhone. That's right, that thing you're watching this video on right now wouldn't exist without diversity. Talking point number 4. Whites are being exploited. It's manipulative because people naturally don't want to be taken advantage of. This one says whites are victims of diversity and says that whites are being taken advantage of by non-whites and, quote, race traitors, or whites that don't have these views. They argue that it's natural for humans to act in the interest of their own race, even at the expense of others outside of their group. It's bullcrap. Remember, powerful people created the whole idea of race in order to divide us and to justify their place at the top of social hierarchies. Also, how exactly are whites being exploited? This is manipulative because it points to a vague threat to make you feel scared, yet doesn't provide good evidence of specific exploitation of whites. And remember, humans cooperating and working together is what built, all of human history. Talking point number 5. Things used to be so much better. It's manipulative because we generally all love nostalgia or an emotional connection to a period in the past. This one tries to inspire nostalgia for an imaginary past when things were better and tradition was respected. In particular, this talking point revolves around the myth that, quote, racial purity used to be a thing and that racial groups used to live separately, and because of that, things were better. It's bullcrap. All modern humans originated from Africa. Different groups of humans have always interacted, and new ethnic groups have formed and evolved throughout human history. Talking point number 6.
At Cox Mobile, we know you need reliable cell service that goes wherever you do. Because why take all those great road trip pics if you can't share them right away? We get it. That's why Cox Mobile runs on the network with more nationwide coverage than T-Mobile, all for a price you'll love. Big reliability meets big savings, no matter where life takes you next. Connect coast to coast with Cox Mobile, the smart way to mobile.
The Jews are to blame. Yeah, do I really have to explain this one? I made a whole video on the history of anti-Semitism, if you also want to check that one out. There are also things to watch out for, what I call Great Replacement Theory red flags. Those who tend to promote the Great Replacement Theory also use shocking images to dehumanize non-whites. They bring up IQ a lot. They bring up Marx, as in Karl Marx, and they bring up cultural Marxism a lot. They bring up open borders a lot. They often refer to migration as an invasion. They tend to talk trash about diversity and multiculturalism. They tend to use certain rhetorical strategies to make radical views seem not so radical at all. Probably the most common rhetorical strategy is limited framing. Limited framing is usually applied in videos in which the host on screen will put boundaries on the discussion to make someone with crazy views seem more reasonable. Basically, they leave out the more controversial stuff and focus on the less controversial stuff they are saying. Like that Warren Northern video I mentioned earlier. And to deflect a bit and to convince you that their opinions are not so crazy after all, they'll say things like, people are saying, if you get get angry at their opinions, they might say, "You mad, bro?" to attempt to make it seem like you're overreacting. Or weak. They present their information as if they are giving the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites or the establishment or the New World Order or the globalists or even just they. They'll say, "You have been lied to," or title their videos something along the lines of "The Truth About Immigration," or "The Real History of Immigration." To defend themselves, they'll often say, "I'm just asking questions," or attack you for not being open-minded enough. Overall, they rely heavily on logical fallacies. Here's a video I made about logical fallacies, by the way. So what is that now? 3 videos to watch after this? That's a lot of homework. And finally, great replacement theory promoters often use memes. Seriously. In fact, memes are a big reason why the great replacement theory has spread in recent years. So let's look at some memes and see if you can spot these great replacement theory red flags. Yeah, first of all, this is literally a limited frame. The person who put this together wanted you to believe that this photo was of men from Afghanistan fleeing the country to the United States after it fell to the Taliban in the summer of 2021. However, and I had to do a lot of digging to find this out, this photo is actually a group of immigrants returning to Afghanistan from Turkey in 2018. What helped me researching it is doing a reverse image search of the photo, and I suggest you do the same whenever you come across any photo that gets you fired up. So the first red flag is the picture. Next, of course, there's the red flag of calling accepting refugees into a country an invasion. 2 red flags right off the bat with this one. One, again, is that word, invading. And second is the shocking image to dehumanize. This also hits at talking point number 3. Diversity is conflict. This picture was circulated claiming to be a picture of refugees fighting with police in Germany in 2015 at the height of the refugee crisis. It was used to manipulate people into being afraid of refugees. Well, the picture was actually taken in 2012 and had nothing to do with the refugee crisis. There's the IQ red flag, of course, and then they just show a picture of supposedly French black people, although I couldn't find where this picture originated from, and so who knows where these people are actually from. And they're not even really trying that hard anymore. They're just showing a picture of black people next to unsubstantiated text. Folks can't even stand peacefully without these manipulators looking for a way to weaponize their image. Hey, I can do that too, see? I could write literally anything. It doesn't make it true. And while that link at the bottom goes to a real study, it has nothing to do with rising immigration in France. But how many people would actually click on it to look at that study? Probably not many, okay? This also hits at talking point number 1. Biology is destiny. This fits the formula of giving the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites, or in this case, they. Who are they, by the way? I've always wanted to know who they were. Anyway, this also hits talking point number 1. Biology is destiny. Talking about, quote, third worlders. And talking point number 4. Whites are being exploited. Oof. This one is especially horrendous. Talking point number 4, whites are being exploited. Talking point number 6, the Jews are to blame. And a bunch of stuff about IQ and marks. And there's the giving of the uncomfortable truth that is a threat to the elites. So here is a picture of the mayor of the London borough of Camden. She is the first black mayor of Camden, and no, is not a supremacist of any kind. What I particularly found fascinating about this one is that the meme implies she needs to be deported back home. Well, I guess deport her to Camden then, since she's lived there her whole life? There are many more examples I found online, but at this point, I'm just getting worn out by all the fear and hate. So let's just wrap this up. The bottom line is the Great Replacement theory is still a big movement because its proponents have done well to play on the natural fears people have of economic and social instability and just change in general. In case you haven't noticed, things haven't been all peachy for the majority of us lately. The world has plenty of problems. Often, it's easier for us to just place blame on certain groups, and groups that are less like us are easy targets. So what can you do in response to Great Replacement theory manipulation? Number 1. Probe the point. Does the content use one of these common talking points that are not backed by evidence? Number 2, fish for flags. Are there any red flags present? Like regular mentions of IQ, use of words like invasion, and shocking images? Number 3, resist the rhetoric. Is there use of a rhetorical strategy like limited framing, reference to a mysterious elitist majority they, or use of logical fallacies? And number 4, mind the meme. Remember that memes are easy to share but difficult to fact check. Make sure to reverse image search to understand a picture's true context and do your own research before you share a meme yourself. These are some small steps you can take to make sure that you don't fall for this messaging, and in general, make society a safer and more peaceful place for all of us. Speaking of all of us, we can't be replaced because humans reproduce. We just make more humans. Let's end this video with a thought experiment. Imagine if you met someone from a foreign country who looked a lot different than you. They had a different religion than you. They liked different foods and music than you. Heck, they didn't even speak your language. But you fell in love with them anyway, and you both got married and had kids and lived happily ever after. Wait, about your future kids. You'd love them too, wouldn't you? They can't replace us because they are us. Don't be fooled. Human differences are really small, so we don't have to fear each other. Instead, let's just get to know each other.
The claim that the United States was founded as a Christian nation is a misconception, one that often overlooks the true intent and historical context of the country's founding. In reality, the United States was born out of a desire to escape religious persecution, as well as the corruption and authoritarianism characterized many European monarchies at a time. Here's a breakdown of why the notion of the U.S. as a Christian nation is a myth and how the country's founding principles were rooted in religious freedom rather than imposition of any one religion. 1. The founders escaped from religious persecution in Europe. Many of the early settlers of what would become the United States were fleeing from the religious oppression and tyrannical control of European monarchies, particularly countries in England, Spain, and France. In these kingdoms, religious adherence was often mandated by the state, and dissenters faced severe consequences, including imprisonment, execution, or exile. The Puritans, Quakers, and other religious minorities sought freedom to worship according to their beliefs without fear of government interference or persecution. Religious freedom was a primary motivating factor in the early colonization of America. The Pilgrims and Puritans who settled in Plymouth Colony in 1620 were seeking the freedom to practice their form of Christianity, free from restrictions imposed by the Church of England. In fact, even within these colonies, there were tensions over different Christian texts, with some groups persecuting others for their religious beliefs. The broader American Revolution and the establishment of the new nation were about breaking away from monarchical systems that were heavily intertwined with state-sponsored religion. The colonies sought to create a government that separated religion from politics, ensuring that no one religion could dominate or dictate the law. 2. The myth of the United States as a Christian nation. The idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation is often pushed by those who wish to blend religious identity with national identity. However, this is a misinterpretation of the founders' intentions and the actual language used in the founding documents. The U.S. Constitution, which established the framework for American government, explicitly prohibits any religious test for office holders. Article 4 and ensures freedom of religion for all citizens in the First Amendment. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, making it clear that the government was intended to be neutral on matters of religion. This separation of church and state was a fundamental principle of the American system, ensuring that no single religion would receive preferential treatment or be imposed on others. Thomas Jefferson, one of the key founding fathers, was a vocal proponent of religious freedom. He famously wrote in his Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, 1786, Almighty God hath created the free mind, emphasizing the importance of individual liberty in matters of faith. Jefferson, like many of the other founders, believed that government should not have a role in regulating or promoting religion. James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, also argued against government involvement in religion, believing that religious practice should be left to individuals and communities, free from political control. 3 is religious pluralism and freedom. The early American colonists didn't seek to establish a Christian theocracy, but rather a society that allowed for religious pluralism. Even the colonists who were Christian didn't all share the same beliefs. Some were Catholic, others were Protestant, and still others had more secular or deistic views. The U.S. Constitution ensured that the government would not impose any one religious views on its citizens, allowing people to practice the religion of their choice, or no religion at all. In this sense, the U.S. was designed to be a secular republic, with the commitment to religious freedom for all. The founders intended for people to have the freedom to worship as they saw fit, without fear of government, persecution, or favoritism. 4 is the diversity of faiths in America today. While Christianity has historically been the dominant religion in the United States, the notion that the country is solely a Christian nation is increasingly challenged by demographic changes. Religious diversity in the U.S. has been growing over the years, with many Americans identifying with non-Christian faiths or as non-religious altogether. According to the recent surveys, a significant and growing portion of the U.S. population identifies as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. The Pew Research Center has found that approximately 30% of Americans are now part of this religiously unaffiliated group, a category that includes atheists, agnostics, and those who simply do not identify with any one religion. In addition to growing secularism, the U.S. is home to a wide range of religious communities, including Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs, as well as indigenous spiritual practices and a growing number of new religious movements. This religious diversity underscores the idea that America is not a Christian nation, but rather a nation that values the freedom to practice whichever faith or no faith one chooses. Number 5, the Founding Fathers' views on religion. The views of the founders on religion were varied, and it's important not to reduce them to a monolithic view of Christianity. Many of the Founding Fathers, such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, were influenced by Enlightenment ideas, which emphasized reason, science, and individual rights over religious dogma, which they were also said Freemasons know esoteric knowledge as well. So these ideas promoted the idea of religious freedom as essential to a healthy society rather than the establishment of any one religion. Some of the founders were Christian, but many were deists, believing in a higher power. but rejecting organized religion and the authority of religious institutions. Figures like Jefferson and Franklin did not advocate for a Christian state, but rather supported the idea of a deistic creator who was not involved in the daily affairs of individuals or nations. This aligns with the broader philosophy of religious tolerance that was central to the U.S. experiment in self-governance. Let me play this video.
If you believe in states' rights, except when a jury in that state convicts your nominee for president, you might be in a cult. If you claim you back the blue but want to defund the police when the police go to your nominee's house to retrieve national security secrets, you might be in a cult. If you're supporting a guy whose felony convictions prevent him from getting a security clearance, you might be in a cult. And if the guy you're supporting for president has felony convictions that prevent him from going to Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Cambodia, Canada, Chile, China, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Ethiopia, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Kenya, Macau, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Nepal, New Zealand, Peru, Philippines, Singapore, South Africa, South Korea, Taiwan, Tanzania, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, and the UK, you might be in a cult.
So again, the United States was not founded as a Christian nation, but rather as a secular republic grounded in principles of religious freedom and pluralism. The founding fathers sought to escape the religious persecution and authoritarianism of Europe, and they created a system where individuals could practice their faith or not practice in any faith without interference from the government. While Christianity has historically been the dominant religion in the U.S. today, a growing number of Americans identify with other faiths or none at all, reinforcing the idea that the country's strength lies in its commitment to freedom of religion, not in the promotion of any one religious ideology. The idea that the United States is a Christian nation is not only historically inaccurate, but it also undermines the very freedoms upon which the nation was built. Hopefully you learned something new from my video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and smash that like button. Also, if you could share my video on your platforms, I would appreciate it as well, and it'll help my platform grow much faster. But also, if you're able to, be sure to check the description box for the GoFundMe link as well. And I do have some more videos coming up soon, so be sure to check for those. Drop a comment in the comment box. Let me know what you think about the dangers of Christian nationalism and white nationalism in the United States and how it directly affects our civil rights and very freedoms of a democracy or our republic. So thank you again, and as always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others. Thank you, and have a blessed day.